Hey guys, how are you? This is Mr. Mahmoud Hafiz and this is one of my favorite stories. So please let's enjoy. Mr. Herm B. Otis was a new American ambassador in England. He needed a house for himself and his family. When he saw Canterville chess, he liked it and wanted to buy it. Everybody said that he was very foolish because everybody believed that the Canterville chess was haunted. Lord Canterville, the owner of the house, told Mr. Otis about the Canterville Ghost. My family and I have not lived there since the ghost terrified my aunt, the Duchess of Politon. One night, she was dressing for dinner when she felt two skeleton hands on her shoulders. She had a fit and has never completely recovered. After the Duchess' terrible experience, none of our younger servants wanted to stay in the house. I must tell you that the other people in the family have also seen or heard the ghost. My wife and I couldn't sleep because of the strange noises that came from the corridor and the library. Well, said Mr. Otis, I will take the house, the furniture, and the ghost. I come from a modern country where we have everything that money can buy. I think that if there is a ghost anywhere in Europe, one of our bright young men would find it, take it to America, and put it in the museum. When Lord Canterville heard this, he smiled. I can assure you that the ghost exists. Perhaps he is a little cleverer than the bright young men from America. He has been in this house since 1584. He usually appears before the death of a member of the family. Mr. Otis laughed and replied, So does the family doctor, Lord Canterville. I don't believe in ghosts. All right, said Lord Canterville. If you don't mind having a ghost for a company, I will sell you the house with pleasure. So Mr. Otis bought the house. A few weeks later, the Otis family were ready to move into their new home. The family consisted of Mr. Otis, his wife, their three sons, and their daughter. Mrs. Lucretia Otis was a good-looking middle-aged woman. The oldest son was a handsome fair-haired young man. His name was Washington, and he was very sensible. The daughter Virginia was a beautiful girl of 15. She loved horses and rode them very well. The two younger boys were twins and loved playing tricks on people. It was a lovely July evening. The family enjoyed the evening sun as they traveled toward the house. However, as they got near the Canterville chess, the sky became dark. An old woman stood from the house. Her name was Mrs. Yumney. She was the housekeeper of Canterville chess. Welcome to the Canterville chess, she said. I have tea ready for you in the library. The family followed her through the house into the library. The library was a long room with a large stained glass window. There was a dark red stain on the floor near the fire. Something has been spilled here, said Mrs. Otis. Yes, madam, Mrs. Yumney said. That is blood. How horrible! I don't want blood on my floor. Mrs. Yumney smiled and said, That is blood of Lady Eleanor de Canterville. Her husband, Sir Simon de Canterville, murdered her here in 1575. Sir Simon disappeared suddenly 9 years later. No one ever found his body. But his ghost haunted this house. No one cleaned the blood from the floor. That's silly, cried Washington. I can clean it up right now with Pinkerton stain remover. He took a small black stick from his pocket and rubbed the stain with it. The blood quickly disappeared. You see, I knew Pinkerton can do it. Just then, a terrible flash of lightning lit up the room and their loud crash of thunder. Mrs. Yumney fell to the floor. What awful weather this country has. What can we do with a woman who faints? We won't pay her for the times that she is unconscious. Mrs. Yumney opened her eyes. She was very upset. She said to Mr. Otis, "Be careful, some trouble is coming to the house. I have seen some terrible things, sir. Things that would terrify anybody. Things that have kept me awake at night." "We aren't afraid of ghosts," they said. "But we would like some tea, please." The storm continued all night, but nothing strange happened. The next morning, however, when the family came downstairs, they saw that the stain was back on the library floor. Washington was very surprised. "This is very strange," he said. "Pinkerton always works." He quickly cleaned the stain, but the following morning it was back again. On the third night, Mr. Otis locked the library door before he went to bed. He took the key upstairs with him. But in the morning, the stain was back again. The whole family found this is very strange, but they still couldn't believe that there was a ghost in the house. That evening, they had gone for a drive and did not return home till 9 o'clock. They had a light supper. They didn't discuss about ghosts. They talked about popular American actresses and the problem of finding their favorite American food in England. They didn't mention Sir Simon de Canterville at all. At 11 o'clock, the family went upstairs to bed. By 11:30, everybody was asleep. Some time later, Mr. Otis woke up. He had heard a strange noise in the corridor outside his room. It sounded like metal clanking, and it was coming closer. He got up, lit a match, and looked at the time. It was exactly 1 o'clock. He was quite calm. He took a small bottle out of the drawer, put on his slippers, and opened the door. Right in front of him stood an old man. He looked terrible. His eyes were red, like hot burning coals. He had dirty long grey hair. He was wearing old-fashioned clothes. There were heavy chains around his wrists and ankles. "My dear sir," said Mr. Otis, "those chains are making an awful noise. I have brought you some oil. Please put it in your chains, otherwise we will not be able to sleep tonight." Mr. Otis put the small bottle on the marble table. Then he went back to his room, closed the door, and returned to bed. The ghost couldn't believe it for a moment. He stared at the closed bedroom door. Then, with a howl of anger, he smashed the bottle on the floor. He turned and ran down the corridor, growing and glowing a horrible blue color. Just as he reached the top of the stairs, a door opened. Two small children in nightgowns appeared in the doorway, and the pillow flew past his head. The ghost disappeared, and the house became quiet again. The ghost reached his small secret room and began to think about the new situation in the house. In his 300 years of hunting, he had never had an experience like this. He felt very insulted. He thought back over his career. I once appeared behind the Duchess of Bolton while she was dressing for dinner and touched her with my skeleton hands. She was so frightened that she had a fit. Another time, 4 housemaids became hysterical when I looked at them through the curtain of their bedroom window. Another night, in the dark library, I made a priest collapse when I blew out his candle. I also scared Madame de Tremeliac. She woke up one morning and saw my skeleton sitting in an armchair reading her diary. Yes, I have had a very long and successful career, and now these dreadful modern Americans offer me oil for my chins and throw pillows at my head. No ghost in history has been treated like this. I will make them regret it. He spent the rest of the night thinking about how to take revenge. The next morning, the Otis family met at the breakfast table. They talked about the ghost. If the ghost doesn't use the oil, Mr. Otis said, we must take this chain away from him. Otherwise, we will not be able to sleep. He then turned to the twins and said, however, I think it was rather rude to throw bells at him. You must remember that he has lived here for much longer than we have. For the rest of the week, the house was quiet at night and everyone slept well. But the stain on the library floor reappeared every morning. This was strange because Mr. Otis locked the library door every night and the windows had bars on them. The stain was a different color every morning. The family found these changes quite amusing. Only Virginia didn't laugh or say a word. On the morning when the stain was green, she nearly cried, but nobody understood why. The ghost appeared again on Sunday night, shortly after the family had gone to bed. They heard the sound of an enormous crash in the hall. Mr. Otis and the children rushed downstairs. The ghost has an expression of terrible pain on his face and was rubbing his knee. The twins had their catapults with them and immediately shot 2 pulls of paper at him. Mr. Otis, who had brought his gun with him, aimed it at the ghost and said, "Put your hands up." The ghost screamed angrily and ran through them like a mist. When he reached the top of the stairs, he decided to give his famous scream of evil laughter. Before he had finished, a door opened and Mrs. Otis appeared in a pink dressing gown. "You poor man," she said. "You are not well at all. I have brought you some excellent medicine. I'm sure it will do you good." The ghost couldn't believe his ears. He wanted to turn himself into a large black dog, but he heard the twins coming. So he disappeared with a loud groan. When he reached his secret room, he was very upset. Those twins and Mrs. Otis are really awful, he thought. He was also very upset because he hadn't been able to wear the suit of armor. For some days after this, the ghost was very ill. He only left his room when he wanted to replace the blood stain on the library floor. But when he began to feel better, he decided to try once more to frighten the Otis family. The ghost chose Friday the 17th of August for his appearance. He spent most of the day deciding what to wear. As night fell, a violent storm started. The wind was very strong and made all the windows shake. The ghost was happy. This was his favorite kind of weather. He was planning to scare the whole family. He thought, I will go to Washington's room first. He started it all when he cleaned up the blood stain. The ghost left his room and started walking toward Washington's room. When the ghost reached the corridor which led to Washington's room, he stopped for a moment and thought to himself, it's time. But he saw something that made him scream out in terror. A terrible figure was standing in front of him. It had a shiny pallid head and a fat round face. Out of its eyes came rays of red light and its mouth looked as if it was on fire. Its neck hung a sign with a strange letter on it. The ghost was extremely terrified. He turned around and ran back to his room as fast as he could. He got into his room, lay on a small bed and hid his face under the covers. But hold on, his courage returned and he decided to try and make friends with this other ghost. Two ghosts are better than one, he thought. With its help, it will be easier to find this terrible family. He got up and returned to the corridor where he had seen the other ghost. When he arrived there, he got another shock. Something terrible had happened to the other ghost. The light had disappeared from its eyes and mouth. He got closer and took the figure in his arms, but just then, the head slipped off and rolled on the floor. It was only a hollow turnip, and the body was just a broom and white bedsheet. Then, the Canterville Ghost saw a sign that had been around the figure's neck. It read, the oldest ghost, the only true, and the original ghost. Beware of imitations. All others are fake. Then, the ghost understood everything. He had been tricked. He was very angry. He raised his hands high and said, I swear that when the cock crows twice, I will have my revenge. The next day, the ghost felt very weak and tired. The excitement of the last 4 weeks had upset him very much. He was very nervous, and the slightest noise made him jump. For 5 days, he just stayed in his room. He even stopped replacing the blood stain on the library floor. If the Otis family don't want it there, they don't deserve it, he thought. For the next 3 Saturdays, he walked along the corridor as usual. He was very careful so that nobody would see or hear him. He walked as quietly as he could. He had even stolen some of Mr. Odie's oil and he put it on his chains to stop them making any noise. The twins continued playing tricks on him. They stretched pieces of string across the corridor, and the ghost often trapped and they fell over. One night, they put some butter near the top of the staircase. The ghost stepped on it, slipped, and fell down the stairs. That made him so angry that he decided to try for one last time to terrify those terrible twins. He decided to visit them as a headless earl. This was his most successful disguise. In fact, the last time he had used it, 2 people had died as a result. When he arrived outside their room, he stopped for a moment. The door was slightly open, so he pushed the door wide open. Just then, a heavy jug of water fell down right on top of him. He was soaked. At the same moment, he heard laughter from the direction of the twins' bed. The ghost ran back to his room as fast as he could. He spent the next day in bed with a very bad cold. The only thing that made him feel better was the fact that he hadn't taken his head with him when the disaster happened. The ghost had lost all hope. He was never going to find this rude American family. He walked around the corridor in a pair of slippers. It was about 2:15 in the morning. He thought it was safe enough to walk around the house. Suddenly, the twins screamed "boo" in his ears. A few days later, Virginia and the young Duke went for a ride in the woods. As they were riding through the trees, Virginia's dress was torn, so she had to go back to the house. As she was running past the tapestry room, she noticed that somebody was inside. Maybe it's one of the maids, she thought. I'll ask her to mend me dress. But to her great surprise, she saw the Canterville Ghost. But she saw him was depressed and ill, so she decided to speak to him. I'm so sorry for you, but no one will annoy you if you behave yourself, she said. The ghost said, That's silly, I cannot behave myself, I'm a ghost. You have been a very bad person. Mrs. Yomni told us that you killed your wife. I did, but that was a family matter, said the ghost. It was nobody else's business. It's very wrong to kill, you know. Nonsense. She was ugly, untidy, and a terrible cook. I had to get rid of her. But I was starved to death. Oh, Mr. Ghost, I'm so sorry. Are you hungry? I have a sandwich in my bag. Would you like it? No, thank you. I never eat anything anymore, but it's very kind of you. I must say that you are much nicer than your horrible, rude, dishonest family. Stop! You are rude, horrible, and dishonest. I know that you stole my pens to replace the blood stain on the library floor. First, you took all my reds, then the green and the yellow. Well, what else could I do? It's difficult to get real blood these days. Please, don't go, Miss Virginia, cried the ghost. I'm so lonely and unhappy. I want to go to sleep, but I can't. I have not slept for 300 years. I'm so tired. Poor ghost. Haven't you got a place where you can sleep? There's a place beyond the woods. It's a beautiful garden where the nightingale sings all night long, and the trees shade the resting places of the people who sleep there. You mean the cemetery? The ghost asked Virginia to show her something. She wasn't afraid. The wall in front of them opened and the cold wind started blowing around them. A moment later, the wall closed behind them and the tapestry room was empty. About 10 minutes later, the bell rang for tea when Virginia didn't appear. Mrs. Otis thought that she was probably picking flowers in the garden and hadn't heard the bell, but when the clock struck 6 and Virginia still hadn't appeared, Mrs. Otis got really worried. She sent the twins to look for her in the garden. Mr. Otis and herself then searched every room in the house. Mr. Otis asked Washington and 2 servants to search the whole area. He himself sent telegrams to all the police inspectors in the country and told them that his daughter had disappeared. Everybody was extremely worried. Mr. Otis said that they all needed to eat something, so he ordered supper. It was silent. Just as they were walking out of the dining room, the clock started to strike midnight. They heard a scream and a terrible peal of thunder made the house shake. Then they heard some strange music and the part of the wall at the top of the staircase opened. Virginia stood in the opening. She looked very white and she was holding a small box in her hand. Where have you been? Asked Mr. Otis. I was with the ghost. He is dead and you must come to see him. He gave me this box of beautiful jewels before he died. He had been very wicked, but he was really sorry for all that he had done. She went back through the opening in the wall and led them down a secret passage. Finally, they came to a big door. It was a small room with a tiny window in the room. There was a skeleton chained to a big iron ring. It was lying on the floor with one arm stretched out toward a small table. There was an old plate and a jug on the table. Virginia began to pray. The rest of them looked sadly. They now understood Sir Simon de Canterville's tragic end. He had been starved to death. Now the jug is empty. There is nothing left in the plate. Virginia knelt down beside the skeleton and said, "God has forgiven him." "You are an angel," said the young duke, and they gave her a kiss. "4 days after these strange events, a funeral procession left Canterville Chase. It was 11 o'clock at night. The hearse was drawn by 8 black horses. The coffin was covered by a large purple cloth with a Canterville coat of arms embroidered on it in gold. 3 carriages followed the hearse. Lord Canterville and Virginia rode in the first of them. In the second carriage were Mr. Otis and the rest of the family. The third carriage carried Mrs. Yomney, the old housekeeper. Virginia remembered the ghost's description of the cemetery, and tears came to her eyes. She was very moved and hardly spoke as they drove back to the house. The next morning, Mr. Otis spoke to the Lord Canterville about the box of jewels that the ghost had given to Virginia. "I believe that these jewels belong to your family. You must keep them. Virginia is too young to be interested in jewels." Lord Canterville smiled at him and said, "No, I want your daughter to keep the jewels. Thanks to her, Sir Simon found peace at least. If I took them from her, the wicked old man would probably rise out of his grave again and start terrifying me." Some years later, Virginia married the young duke and became the Duchess of Cheshire. At the wedding, she wore some of the jewels the ghost had given her. Everybody said that they were the most wonderful jewels they had ever seen. After their honeymoon, the Duke and Duchess went to Canterville Chase. One afternoon, they went for a walk to the churchyard. They stood by Sir Simon's grave and read an inscription on it. It was the old prophecy from the library window. "It's a secret." The Duke took Virginia's hand and kissed his wife. "You can have your secret as long as I have your heart."